Eviscerated flesh spilled blood onto the scorched dirt as Private Scott Murray relentlessly gunned down Illyrian soldiers, his mangled body refusing to yield in the face of devastating wounds that would have killed any other species within minutes. Alara crouched behind the smoldering remains of an armored transport, staring in disbelief at the grievously injured human who continued to fight with ferocious tenacity across the war-ravaged battlefield. His chest was slashed wide open, his left arm hung shattered and limp, and plasma burns melted skin from his legs, yet he showed no signs of stopping his one-man onslaught against her comrades. She had to get to him. As an Illyrian field medic, it was her duty to save lives, even those of the enemy. She needed to treat the human's horrific wounds before he bled out. More importantly, Alara had to take him as a prisoner of war. They had to win this battle. This fringe colony planet was humanity's last major foothold. If it fell, so would any hope for the human's survival and freedom. The war had been brutally one-sided from the start. The Illyrian Empire was determined to conquer Earth and subjugate its population. Humanity was putting up a stubborn resistance, but they were vastly outmatched and outgunned. Most of their defenses had already fallen. This battle would likely decide the outcome of the war and the fate of the human species. Steeling herself, Alara darted from cover to cover, making her way toward the human soldier's position. She couldn't fathom how he was still standing, let alone fighting so skillfully. The Illyrian soldiers he gunned down had barely managed to land a shot on him before falling to his marksmanship and ruthless hand-to-hand combat prowess. In all her years treating the injuries of dozens of species across hundreds of worlds, Alara had never witnessed anything like this human's sheer grit and tolerance for pain. It defied explanation. Her superiors had always described humans as a primitive, barbaric species, an inferior race of savages hardly worth a second thought before being ground beneath the Illyrian Empire's boot heel. But seeing the raw valor and unbreakable will of this lone soldier, even in the face of near-certain death, Alara felt doubt creeping into her heart. Perhaps the Illyrians had drastically underestimated their foe. As she finally reached the human side, Alara tried to restrain him, to treat his grievous injuries before he lost too much blood. But he resisted with stunning strength, ignoring his horrific wounds as he continued fighting tooth and nail against the Illyrian forces bearing down on them. Alara eventually subdued the struggling human, her mind racing as she confronted the grim extent of his injuries up close. By all rights, he should already be dead. How was he still clinging to life, let alone consciousness? What drove his kind to keep fighting against such insurmountable odds? As she worked frantically to stabilize him, Alara couldn't shake the unnerving sense that this strange, resilient species held hidden depths her people had scarcely begun to fathom. Reinforcements soon arrived to take the gravely wounded human prisoner and haul him away from the front lines. He remained defiant to the last, staring down his captors with fierce resolve, even as he finally collapsed from blood loss and shock. Around them, the ferocious battle still raged, with no end in sight and the fate of Earth hanging in the balance. Alara knew only one thing for certain, as she watched her fellow soldiers drag the human's limp body toward the field hospital. Underestimating the human's tenacity had been a grave mistake. This fight was far from over. The trip from the blood-soaked battlefield to the Illyrian field hospital passed in a haze of agony and chaos. Private Scott Murray drifted in and out of consciousness, his broken body jostling on the transport as medics scrambled to keep him alive. Alara worked frantically alongside her fellow medics, shouting orders and fighting to stabilize their critical patient. She pumped dose after dose of clotting agents and stimulants into Scott's veins, barely keeping pace with his catastrophic blood loss. His mangled flesh continued oozing crimson as they rushed him into surgery. Laying Scott on the operating table, Alara stared in disbelief at the extent of his injuries. Shattered bones protruded from his arm, while deep lacerations carved through his chest and abdomen. Heavy plasma burns marred most of his lower extremities. She marveled that he hadn't succumbed to shock and blood loss already. As the medical team cut away Scott's shredded uniform and armor, Alara paused to marvel at his raw endurance. She had treated countless injured Illyrian soldiers before, but never one so grievously wounded who still clung to life. Examining his battered body up close, Alara noticed strange discrepancies. His muscle fibers seemed denser than expected. His circulatory system contained redundancies and backups never seen in other species. Filing those peculiar observations away for later study, Alara threw herself into the grueling task of piecing Scott back together. Long hours passed in a grueling struggle of surgery and life support. The human flatlined twice on the table, yet somehow kept fighting his way back from the brink. Through sheer grit and the tireless efforts of the Illyrian medics, Scott survived. Alara watched over the unconscious human soldier, perplexed and fascinated by his tenacious will to live. She collected tissue samples and ran scans, determined to unravel the secrets of his uncanny resilience. Suddenly, Scott's eyes snapped open. He thrashed against his restraints, snarling with primal desperation. Caught off guard, Alara barely dodged his swinging fist as he ripped one arm free. Several medics rushed to hold him down while Alara prepared a sedative. Scott bucked and struggled with astonishing strength for one so critically wounded. He seemed heedless of his own suffering, driven by an unrelenting compulsion to fight that Alara had never encountered before. It took 4 Illyrians to subdue him long enough for her to administer the sedative. As Scott slipped back into the embrace of pharmacological sleep, Alara found herself deeply shaken. She had seen the raw, almost feral intensity in his eyes, the unbreakable spirit of a being that would never stop resisting, never submit. How could the Illyrian Empire hope to conquer a species possessed of such preternatural grit and grit? Despite all their technological and military might, had her people underestimated the true scope of the challenge humans posed? These unsettling thoughts gnawed at Alara as she watched over Scott's recovery in the days that followed. She poured through the medical databases in her sparse off hours, trying to learn everything she could about human biology and psychology. What evolutionary pressures had forged them into such hardy, defiant creatures? How might the Illyrians overcome humanity's dogged refusal to bend the knee? Word quickly spread among the ranks about the grievously injured human soldier who had cut down scores of Illyrian troops single-handedly and kept fighting with a savage fury even in the face of near-certain death. Wild tales circulated of humans shrugging off lethal wounds, ignoring pain and fear through sheer force of will. Some whispered that they possessed unnatural abilities bordering on the supernatural. Driven by burgeoning curiosity and a hunger to give her species any advantage in this brutal war of conquest, Alara approached her superiors with a daring proposal. She requested permission to personally supervise the human prisoner's recovery and interrogation, arguing that by studying him closely, she might uncover vital intel on how to defeat his kind. But Alara's request was met with suspicion and pushback. Her colleagues questioned the prudence of allowing her such unfettered access to a dangerous enemy combatant. They feared her judgment may become compromised by a treacherous fascination with the human. Still, Alara's brilliant record and reputation for cold clinical detachment from her subjects won out in the end. Her superiors reluctantly granted her custody of the prisoner, but with strict orders to maintain total objectivity and not hesitate to terminate him at the first sign of trouble. And so a strange dance began between Alara and Scott as he slowly regained his strength under her meticulous care. Duty and enmity hung thick in the air between them, yet a current of mutual respect and curiosity rippled beneath the surface. The hardened soldier and dispassionate medic circled each other warily, both determined to uphold their oaths, yet unable to deny a building fascination with their supposed adversary. All the while, distant explosions and tremors shook the field hospital as the existential battle between human and Illyrian raged on with no end in sight. Behind those battered walls, an improbable connection kindled to life between 2 lost souls on opposite sides of the war, a bond that threatened to burn down everything they thought they knew. Days turned to weeks as Scott's wounds slowly knitted under Alara's attentive care. The field hospital buzzed with tension, whispers and sidelong glances following her every move. "He's a security risk," Lieutenant Kraz hissed during a staff meeting. "We should extract information by any means necessary." Ilara stood her ground. "Torture won't work. Humans are too stubborn. We'll learn more through trust." Her superiors reluctantly agreed, but she felt their scrutiny intensify. In Scott's sterile room, Ilara checked his vitals. "How's the pain today?" Scott glared. "Go to hell, Illyrian." But as days passed, his drive wavered. During an exam, he asked, "Why are you being decent to me?" "I'm curious," Ilara admitted. "Your species fascinates me." Gradually, Scott opened up. He spoke of Earth's blue skies, of baseball games with his father. Ilara shared tales of Illyrian crystal cities, of the rigid efficiency that defined their lives. "We value order above all. But you humans, you endure such chaos, such pain. How?" Scott shrugged. "It's just who we are. We adapt. We survive." Their talks deepened. Ilara realized humans were far more than savages. Scott saw honor in his captor. But others grew impatient. One night, Ilara caught orderlies depriving Scott of food and sleep. "This ends now," she snapped, forcing them out. As tensions mounted, Ilara stumbled upon classified files. Her blood ran cold as she read of a superweapon capable of annihilating all life on Earth. She rushed to Scott's room and removed his restraints. "We have to go. Now." "What? Why?" "I'll explain later, but we must stop this weapon together." Scott hesitated, then nodded. As alarms blared, they slipped into the night, an unlikely alliance forged in the crucible of war. The Illyrian bioweapons facility erupted in chaos as plasma bolts seared through the air. Scott and Ilara sprinted down a corridor, leading their small strike team deeper into the complex. Alarms blared and emergency lights bathed everything in an eerie red glow. "This way!" Scott shouted, gesturing toward a heavy blast door. He pounded his fist on the access panel, but it remained sealed. "Ilara, can you hack it?" Ilara's fingers flew over the alien controls. "I'm trying, but the security protocols are—" The door hissed open, revealing a squad of Illyrian soldiers. Scott didn't hesitate. He charged forward, tackling the lead soldier and wrestling away his weapon. The rest of the strike team poured through the opening, filling the air with gunfire. They fought their way down level after level, leaving a trail of destroyed security drones and fallen Illyrian troops in their wake. Scott's muscles screamed with exertion, his barely healed wounds threatening to reopen. But he pushed on, driven by raw desperation. Finally, they reached the central vault. Scott's heart sank as he saw the massive bioweapon payload, primed and ready for launch. "Ilara, get to work on those launch controls," he ordered. "We'll hold them off." No sooner had the words left his mouth than a fresh wave of Illyrian elites swarmed into the chamber. At their head strode Supreme Commander Raldor, his aristocratic features twisted in a sneer. "Foolish primitives," Raldor drawled. "Did you truly think you could stop the inevitable? Your planet burns as we speak." Scott raised his weapon. "As long as one human draws breath, we'll never stop fighting you bastards." Raldor laughed. "Such misplaced bravado. Guards, exterminate these pests." The chamber exploded into violence. Scott watched in horror as his comrades fell one by one to the ruthlessly efficient Illyrian elites. He fought like a man possessed, his fists and feet a blur as he engaged opponent after opponent. Eventually, only Scott and Raldor remained standing. They circled each other warily, two alpha predators preparing for the kill. Scott struck first, driving his fist toward Raldor's face. The Illyrian commander dodged with preternatural speed, retaliating with a devastating kick to Scott's ribs. They traded blows in a deadly dance, Scott's raw fury slowly wearing down Raldor's polished technique. Just as Scott seemed to gain the advantage, Raldor's hand blurred. Searing pain erupted across Scott's abdomen as an energy blade sliced through flesh and muscle. Scott stumbled backward, clutching the gaping wound. He saw Ilara's shocked face, her eyes wide with disbelief, But even as his lifeblood poured out, Scott refused to yield. With a primal roar, he hurled himself at Raldor. The Illyrian commander's triumphant expression turned to shock as Scott's momentum carried them both onto a jagged piece of debris. Raldor screamed as the metal speared through his back. Scott, running on pure adrenaline, wrenched the plasma blade from Raldor's grasp and plunged it into the Illyrian's throat. As Raldor's life ebbed away, Ilara's voice rang out. "I've done it! The launch is aborted!" Scott collapsed to his knees, the last of his strength deserting him. Ilara rushed to his side, cradling his head in her lap. Tears streamed down her face as she frantically tried to staunch his wounds. "It's okay," Scott wheezed. We won. That's all that matters." "Don't talk like that," Ilara sobbed. "We'll get you out of here. You'll be fine." Scott shook his head weakly. "Promise me something, Ilara. Don't let this be for nothing. Keep fighting. Show them what humanity is made of." "I promise," Ilara whispered, her voice breaking. Scott's eyes drifted closed, a faint smile on his lips. He had done his part. Now it was up to Ilara to carry on the fight. Ilara gently laid Scott's body down and stood, her face hardening with purpose. She keyed her communicator. "This is Ilara. Mission accomplished, but we need immediate evac." Wiping away her tears, Ilara led the few surviving team members to the waiting shuttle. As they blasted off, the Illyrian facility disappeared in a firestorm of retaliatory bombardment. Once safely away, Ilara sat at the shuttle's comm station. Her hands trembled as she began to record a message, pouring out everything she had witnessed and learned about the incredible human spirit. She spoke of Scott's unwavering courage, of humanity's refusal to submit to tyranny. "I've seen firsthand the strength that lies within the human heart," Ilara declared, her voice growing stronger. "And I swear by all that I hold dear, I will stand with humanity until my dying breath. The Illyrian Empire's days of oppression are numbered. Together, we will forge a new future, one of freedom and hope for all sentient beings." As the shuttle sped toward the Resistance's hidden base, Ilara's words ignited a spark of defiance in the hearts of all who heard them. Human and Illyrian alike, they began to believe that perhaps victory was possible after all.
You have reached the end of the story. If you enjoyed this story and want to support us, please leave a like and subscribe to our channel, and for every comment that says 88, I will heart every single one of them. Thank you for your time.